you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I just want to make one point today about the transparency of petrol and diesel prices. Let me start by saying that the government has stepped up to the plate when it comes to cutting fuel duty. Ministers have done more to cut fuel duty in 2 years than many governments in the past. But fuel duty is still a stealth tax. They're right. As the Fair Fuel UK campaign have pointed out, we're not straight with the public about how much tax they are paying. And I should pay tribute to Fair Fuel UK for one of the most effective campaigning groups in our country. Now, at the moment, when I fill up my car, my receipt says fuel £50, VAT £10. This is wrong. If my receipt was accurate, it would say something more like fuel £25, duty £25, VAT £10. And there should be some mention of how much that tax is actually spent on our roads. So I want to make 3 brief points. It was never meant to be like this, what I am proposing, and why transparency works. Now, the history of car taxation is a textbook case of how a tax becomes entrenched. First it's temporary, hypothecated for a specific purpose, then it's expanded, finally it folds out into general taxation. And this is exactly what happened to fuel duty between 1909 and 1937. In the early 20th century, funding for roads was drawn mainly from local ratepayers. The so-called People's Budget in 1909, from the Liberal Party, put a new duty on motor spirit, i.e. petrol, in the days before ECC membership forced us to introduce VAT, and this was ring-fenced for a road improvement fund. The explicit promise of Lloyd George in his budget speech on 29th of April 1909 was, and I quote, "The funds so raised will not merely be devoted exclusively to the improvement of the roads, but they will be well and wisely spent for that end." By the 1920s, the road fund was repeatedly raided to prop up the Treasury, and at the same time, fuel duty was compounded with licence fees, vehicle taxes and so forth. And eventually, from 1937, motoring duty was treated as a general tax. The result, by 1966, was just that 33% of the revenue was actually spent on roads. By 2008, just 20%. And of course, over the years, a series of temporary, in quotation marks, increases were brought in. The fuel duty escalator began, in some senses, in 1956 with the Hydrocarbon Oil Duties Temporary Increase Act, back when duty was fluctuating between 5p and 6p a litre, and VAT did not exist. The temporary increase was a mirage. Fuel duty is now 58p with 20% VAT on top, an increase of more than 1,000%. And my argument is that on every receipt, on every fuel bill, the tax burden should be clear and transparent, and there should be some indication of how much is being spent on our roads. So my receipt would say, fuel £25, duty £25, VAT £10, amount spent on roads £7. My honourable friend, the member for Ipswich, proposed this for income tax, welcomed by the Chancellor. Let us do the same for petrol and diesel. Now, why is this necessary? First, we should be honest with motorists. The average family in Harlow spends a tenth of their income on fuel, more than they spend on the weekly shop. In essence, they are facing fuel poverty, and morally, they have the right to know why their bills are so high. And tax transparency will act as a deterrent and stop any government hiking fuel duty without good reason, because people will see the increase on their receipts.
My honourable friend, as always, is making a compelling case on this issue. Would he agree with me that not only is it important that the ordinary motorist knows this, but it's particularly important to the business, the road haulage industry, which has been crippled by heavy taxes?
Yeah, my honourable friend is exactly right, and I know that when he goes back to his constituents of Cleethorpes, they will be thanking him in the streets for the work that he's done with me to try and cut the price of fuel duty. Now, it will also be easier to hold the big oil companies to account. The government say that their actions have a low impact compared with the huge swings in the oil price. My proposal would give people the hard evidence on a weekly basis to know if falls in the oil price are being passed on to the consumers, as recommended by the website which I'm involved in, www.petrolpromise.com. Now, in conclusion, my proposal does what it says on the tin, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We need basic transparency on fuel duty about what people pay and where the money goes. It's more honest, it's a deterrent against tax rises, and it adds pressure on oil companies to be fair. And therefore, I hope, if the House is willing, to introduce a private members' bill on this subject later this year. But in the meantime, I would urge the Minister to consider this proposal for the autumn statement.